I used to believe hotels were the safest places on earth. After all, they're brightly lit, staffed, around the clock, with security cameras watching every hallway. That belief died one winter, night in 2019, during my overnight shift at a small chain hotel just outside Denver. I was the lone night clerk stationed behind the reception desk with nothing but a muted TV for company. It was close to 1 a.m., that hour when the world outside feels like it has stopped breathing. Most guests were asleep, and the only sound was the hum of the vending machine near the lobby. I was scrolling through the reservation list when I saw him. The man from room 215. At first glance, nothing about him seemed odd late 30s, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. But his eyes, they didn't blink when I looked up. He stood at the far end of the hallway, just watching me. His posture was strange too, still, like he wasn't just standing there but waiting for something. I forced a polite smile. "Can I help you, sir?" I called down the hallway. My voice echoed faintly. No response. I stepped out from behind the desk, my footsteps sounding unnaturally loud. Against the tile, the man didn't move. Then, without a word, he turned the corner. I exhaled, brushing it off as maybe a drunk guest or someone who got locked out of their room. I walked down to 215, his room, I thought, and knocked lightly. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. I returned to the front desk and checked the system, pulling up the night's arrivals. There was no record of anyone in 215. In fact, that room hadn't been booked in over a week. I froze, staring at the screen like maybe I had typed the wrong number. But the system was clear. 215 was unoccupied. The image of the man's unblinking stare lingered in my head. I decided to investigate, grabbing the master key. As I made my way down the hallway, I noticed how quiet it was. Hotels at night have a certain kind of silence that feels wrong. You can almost hear the building's bones creak. I reached 215 and slid the master key into the lock. The door clicked open. The room was empty, completely empty. Not checked out, empty. There were no sheets on the bed, no lamps, no furniture. Just a hollow, dark space with bare drywall, stained carpet, and a damp, metallic smell. I stood there for a good minute, my heart hammering in my chest, trying to make sense of it. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway behind me. Slow, deliberate. I turned around. The hallway was empty. I tried to convince myself it was just the building settling, or maybe another guest walking down a different floor. But when I shut the door and walked back to the lobby, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At around 2:30 a.m., the front doors opened with a quiet chime. I looked up, expecting a late arrival, but the lobby was empty. I stared at the glass doors, then checked the parking lot, cameras, nothing. No car, no person. Something felt wrong with the air. Heavy, charged. Started pacing behind the counter, my eyes flicking toward the hallway that led to 215. That's when I noticed something I had somehow missed before. The security monitor showed the second floor hallway, and standing just outside 215's door, clear as day, was the man in the gray hoodie. I froze, my hand hovering over the phone. He wasn't moving. He wasn't even facing the camera, just standing there sideways, like he was listening for something. Then, without warning, his head snapped up toward the camera, and he smiled. The smile was thin, stretched too wide, like it was pulled across his face with invisible wires. My entire body went cold. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. While waiting for the dispatcher to answer, I kept my eyes glued to the monitor. The man never moved. He just stared at the camera as if he knew I was watching. 911, what's your emergency? I stammered something about an intruder in the hotel, trying to explain that he was in a supposedly vacant room. But when I glanced back at the monitor, he was gone. The police arrived within 15 minutes. They did a sweep of the second floor, checked all the doors, even went inside 215. Nothing. No man, no footprints, no sign anyone had been there. They suggested maybe I'd seen a guest who had wandered into the wrong area, but I knew what I saw. After they left, I tried to convince myself it was over. But around 4 a.m., as I sat at the desk, exhausted and shaken, I heard the elevator ding. My stomach dropped. We had no late arrivals. No one checked out. I watched the security feed. Elevator doors opened on the second floor. No one stepped out. I quit that job 2 weeks later, but the images from that night still haunt me. The bare room with no furniture, the man's smile, and the way he looked directly into the camera as though he could see me watching him. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm home alone and the world outside is quiet, I'll catch myself glancing toward the shadows in the corner of my living room, half expecting to see a gray hoodie and an unblinking stare. I've stayed in dozens of short-term rentals for work. As a traveling nurse, I move from city to city. Every few months, and Airbnbs have always been a cheaper, quieter alternative to hotels. But after what happened in Portland last spring, I don't think I'll ever book one again. It was late. March, the tail end of the rainy season. I had just started a night shift contract at a hospital, and I needed a place close by. The listing looked perfect. A cute one-bedroom basement apartment in a residential neighborhood. The host's profile showed a friendly older woman named Karen. She had over 80 positive reviews, all mentioning how clean and welcoming the place was. I didn't hesitate to book. The first night was uneventful. The space was simple, a small living room, kitchenette, and a bedroom with a queen bed. The windows were high on the wall, narrow and partially obscured by bushes outside. I unpacked, made tea, and streamed a show, until I fell asleep. The second night, I came back from work around 3 the rain. Then was exhausted. As I turned the key in the door, I had a weird thought. The welcome mat was slightly off-center, like someone had stepped on it repeatedly. I brushed it off. It had been raining and windy. Maybe the weather shifted it. Inside, something felt different. I couldn't pinpoint it. My bag, which I'd left on the counter, was leaning slightly over the edge. I told myself I must have left it that way. I was too tired to overthink, so I went straight to bed. The third night, I came home to find my toothbrush wet. I stood there in the bathroom, staring at it. I hadn't brushed my teeth since leaving for work, and I never leave my toothbrush wet in the holder. It wasn't soaked, but it had that slight dampness, like someone had just rinsed it. My stomach tightened. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the bathroom humidity made it feel wet. I told myself I was overreacting. But then I noticed something else. My phone charger, which I'd left plugged in beside the bed, was on the floor. Not just fallen, but coiled neatly, like someone had deliberately set it down. I couldn't shake the unease, so I messaged the host. "Hi, Karen. Just a quick question. Has anyone else been in the unit today? Maintenance or something?" She replied a few minutes later. "Nope. You're the only guest. I live upstairs, but I wouldn't go into your space. Is something wrong?" I typed out a response, but deleted it. I didn't want to seem paranoid. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old house felt amplified. Every gust of wind against the window made my heart skip. At around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps upstairs, normal for a house. But then there was a sound in my hallway. A floorboard groaned. I froze, clutching the blanket. My brain scrambled for rational explanations. Maybe the noise carried weird from upstairs. Maybe another creak, this time closer. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The hallway was empty. My pulse was pounding so hard I could feel it in my neck. I tiptoed out of the bedroom, checking the front door. Locked. The kitchen looked normal. Nothing out of place. I spent the rest of the night half asleep on the couch, lights on, telling myself I was imagining things. The next evening, before I left for my shift, I placed a tiny piece of paper just inside the front door, leaning it against the jamb. It was an old trick my dad taught me when I was a kid. If anyone opened the door, even slightly, the paper would fall. When I came back at 3 a.m., the paper was on the floor. My stomach dropped. I checked the deadbolt, still locked. Nothing. Inside looked disturbed. But that paper told me everything I needed to know. Someone had been in there. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, every light on, clutching a kitchen knife I'd found in a drawer. At around 4 a.m., I heard something faint, like a door creaking. Open. I held my breath and listened. It was coming from the utility closet near the kitchen. I had never opened that closet before. I assumed it was just storage. My hands were trembling as I approached. The door was slightly ajar, just a sliver. I pushed it open with the knife's handle. Inside, there was a narrow staircase leading up to the main house. I felt like my skin had turned to ice. That wasn't in the listing photos. I realized whoever lived upstairs could easily come down here without using the main door. I bolted. I didn't grab my bag, didn't lock the door, just ran to my car and sat there shaking. I called Karen from this driveway, voice trembling. "Did you come into the apartment?" I demanded. She sounded confused and slightly annoyed. "No. Why would I? You're safe down there. It's a separate unit." "What's going on?" I didn't tell her. I just drove to the hospital parking lot and waited for sunrise. The next morning, I returned with a friend from work. We went straight to the utility closet. At first, everything looked normal. But then I noticed something wedged under the bottom step. A small plastic bag. Inside were personal items. A lighter, a cheap flip phone, and a folded piece of paper with my name on it. Written in messy handwriting. "You look tired when you sleep." I felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. We called the police. They searched the main house, but Karen claimed no one had been living there except her. They didn't find anyone. She said the stairs were blocked off from her side, but the lock was broken. Maybe a previous tenant still had access? Maybe she was lying? I don't know. I moved out that day. I didn't even ask for a refund. I just wanted out. Now, months later, I still double-check every lock. I still wake up at 3 a.m. sometimes, certain I've heard footsteps in the hallway, and I still can't stop thinking about that note and how close someone had to be to me in the dark to know how I looked when I slept. I travel up for work. Long weeks, cheap hotels, and lonely nights. I've always preferred hotels to Airbnbs because at least with hotels, you know the rooms are standardized, predictable, safe. But during a business trip to Cleveland last fall, I learned that some walls have memories, and some sounds can't be ignored. It was a budget hotel, the kind with fading wallpaper and carpets that feel sticky no matter how much you scrub your shoes on the mat. Checked in late, around 11 p.m., after a brutal day of client meetings. The clerk barely looked up when handing me the keycard. I was too tired to care. My room was 312, at the far end of the hallway. The place smelled faintly like bleach and old smoke. I dumped my bag on the chair, showered, and collapsed on the bed. I must have been asleep for an hour when I woke up to a sound. A muffled cry. At first, I thought it was someone on the street outside. But as I lay there, holding my breath, I realized the sound wasn't coming from outside at all. It was coming from the vent above the TV. It was faint, almost indistinguishable from the hum of the fan, but I swear I heard a sob, a single broken sob. My skin prickled. I told myself it was just pipes or airflow. Hotels make weird noises all the time, right? But when I leaned closer to the vent, I heard something that turned my stomach, a low, whispered voice. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded pleading. I backed away, shaking my head, telling myself I was overtired. I turned up the TV to drown it out, and eventually fell asleep. The next night, it happened again. I woke up around 2:02, same muffled crying. This time, I was sure it wasn't my imagination. I stood on the chair and pressed my ear to the vent. What I heard made my blood run cold. Please, stop. Woman's voice, faint but unmistakable. I stumbled back, heart racing. My first thought was to call the front desk, but what would I even say? Hi, I think there's someone crying in my air vent. I decided to investigate instead. Vent cover was old and loose. I unscrewed it with my keys and peered inside. A rush of cold air hit my face. About 2 feet in, I saw what looked like a small bundle of fabric wedged against the duct wall. I reached in and pulled it out. It was a torn piece of cloth, stained, and not just with dust. There were dark, reddish smears. My stomach turned. I shoved it into a plastic bag I found in the trash can, not even sure why I kept it. Maybe for proof that I wasn't going crazy. Next morning, I asked the front desk if anyone else had reported strange noises. The clerk just shrugged and said the hotel was old. The vents connect through multiple rooms, he said. You're probably just hearing the people next door. But the room next door, minus 311, was empty. I noticed it the first night. The door was slightly open, with no luggage inside. Something about that door gnawed at me all day. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the vent. At around 1:45 a.m., the crying started again, soft, desperate. I stood on the chair, flashlight in hand, and whispered into the vent. Hello? Are you okay? The crying stopped. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then from somewhere, deep in the ducts, a whisper. Don't let him hear you. My entire body went rigid. I bolted out of the room, barefoot, heart pounding, and pounded on 311's door. No answer. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. The room was dark, stripped bare, with furniture covered in white sheets. I almost left, but something compelled me to check the vent in there too. It was the same design as mine. I climbed on the dresser, unscrewed the cover, and what I found still haunts me. Behind the vent cover, there was a narrow crawl space. Not a full duct, more like a gap. Between the walls, inside it, I saw something shiny. I reached in and pulled it out, a small keyring with 3 keys and a faded charm shaped like a cat. But deeper inside, wedged into the dust and insulation, was something worse. A photo, a Polaroid of a woman's face. Her eyes were wide, her mouth open mid-screen. I stumbled back, dropping the photo like it burned me. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps in the hallway. Someone was coming. I panicked, grabbed the photo and keys, and rushed back into my room, locking the door. I stood there in the dark, listening. The footsteps stopped right outside. Then came a slow, heavy knock. I didn't answer. The knock came again, harder this time. A man's voice, low and flat. Maintenance, just checking the vents. My throat went dry. He didn't sound like hotel staff. And why would maintenance be coming around at 2 I stayed silent. After a long pause, the footsteps moved on. I didn't sleep at all. At dawn, I went downstairs, pale and trembling, and asked the day manager if anyone had been doing maintenance last night. She gave me a confused look and shook her head. When I showed her the photo and keys, her face was drained of color. She didn't say much, just took them from me, muttering something about old incidents and promising to call the police. Later that day, I checked out early. I didn't ask for a refund. I just wanted out. As I walked to my car, I glanced up at the third floor. In the window of room 311, I swear I saw a shadow move. A tall figure standing just behind the curtain, watching me. Even now, months later, I can still hear that whisper in my head. Don't let him hear you. I haven't stayed in a budget hotel since